Dr. Dawson Church, who's an award-winning science writer with 3 best-selling books to his credit. We're going to probably talk only about one of them today, but there are 3 of the books that he's written are The Genie in Your Genes, which was a book that demonstrated how emotions drive gene expression. There's Bliss Brain, which is most recent, which demonstrates that peak mental state rapidly remodel the brain for happiness. And what we're going to talk about mostly today is Mind to Matter, how the brain creates much of what we think of as objective reality. Now, Dawson's got the best laugh I've ever heard, so hopefully we're going to get some laughs from him today. Dawson, welcome to Chaos to Creation Confessions. Look,
I've spent a lot of time laughing already. I'm sure we'll laugh some more.
Fantastic. So I'm going to hand it over to you, really, the whole creation process. You've written 3 books. They didn't just appear out of nowhere. How did these books just turn up?
Well, the first big bestseller I had was The Genie in Your Genes. I've written several books before that, but that book I really was impassioned about making a success, because it's so vital to understand that our thoughts, our consciousness, our beliefs, these things that we think of as being totally intangible, are actually having a completely determinative effect on our gene expression. They are literally turning genes on and off. One study showed that certain mental states are shifting over 100 genes. Laughter is changing the expression of 32 genes. So I wanted to really make that clear to people in that book. And I had this insight, and I'd also had ideas I'd heard at different conferences, so psychology conferences and biology conferences and acupuncture and acupressure, oriental medicine conferences and epigenetic conferences, and no one was putting all these ideas together. And I thought, there's a book in this, The Genie in Your Genes. And if I don't write that book, it's out there in the energy field. Somebody else is going to write it, and I'll be really pissed off if one day I see The Genie in Your Genes by my friend Bruce Lipton. So I'm going to write the book. I just worked with Bruce on a book called The Biology of Belief. And so I then wanted to take Bruce's ideas to the next stage into showing how these intangibles affect gene expression. And so I had this incredible insight, and I just focused and wrote the book, and also really focused on promoting the book in the next few years. And I thought, after Genie in Your Genes, that's my big magnum opus, that I had this, I'm so gifted by the universe. I felt so gifted that I'd had this one incredible insight that emotion, spirituality is driving gene expression. And I thought, wow, if I've done, that's my lifetime accomplishment. And then I was talking to my friend Reed Tracy, who is the publisher of Hay House, about a radio series I was doing. And I'd become aware of this whole idea in the New Age movement and in the law of attraction, The Secret, that your thoughts create your reality. And as a researcher, I'd done a lot of research, especially on traumatic stress. I'd worked with a lot of veterans with traumatic stress. Various volunteer groups I was associated with had done work in Rwanda with victims of the genocide there. We'd done work in the Congo with female victims of sexual violence. We'd done a lot of work with Vietnam veterans, and now with the new generation of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. So that was my field. And I began hearing these reports from various people of these rapid outcomes, rapid changes people were experiencing with energy psychology, energy therapies. And then this whole idea that is talked about in the law of attraction, that our thoughts are able to create our reality. I was a skeptic about that. So I did a series of radio shows, and I wanted to see how much truth there was in terms of physics and chemistry, mathematics, and hard science behind the idea that our thoughts create our reality. So I finished this 10 years worth of PTSD research with veterans, and then I began to turn my attention to this other phenomenon of mind to matter. And I did these interviews with these distinguished scientists, and I began to see all of these ways in which mind actually does create matter, and the brain states create matter. So I talked to my friend Reed Tracy one day, mentioned it to him offhandedly, and he said, oh, there's a book in there, and Mind to Matter. Let's go ahead and see what you've got. So I began to put all those ideas together, and I expected, when I began to look at all the links in the chain between a thought and a thing, that scientifically we'd find there were a few links we could prove. but there'd be a lot of gaps in the chain. And to my astonishment, as I worked on the book and looked at the research, and there are over 400 scientific studies that underpin my book, Mind to Matter, I found that we could show and prove every single link in the chain between our thoughts and our reality. So suddenly I had this other book that became a bestseller. It sold over 100,000 copies. It's been selling now in German and French and Spanish and all kinds of other languages. It's become a real phenomenon, and people are practicing these methods that I have in the book and then seeing how their worlds start to change around them when they're in they're coherent mental states. And I found in the book that the difference between the person who has an aspiration and an intention and the one who actually manifests their intention is mental and brain coherence. And we literally hook people up to EEGs, and I've got images like this showing these states in Mind to Matter. If you look at, like my friend Jack Canfield, who wrote The Success Principles, brilliant manifestor, he's the star of the movie The Secret. And what Jack intends is just going to happen. He's just that kind of a guy. And then other people I've known have these wonderful intentions, high visions, nothing happens. What's the difference? And when we hook them up to an EEG, the difference is brain coherence. So their brain waves, and we see these images in the book from EEG studies, and you'll see the brain waves of a Jack Canfield. They are in sync. They're marching in step. All their brain waves are in sync together. If you look at the brain waves of a person who's not a good manifester, maybe they have high visions, but they aren't accomplishing what they want to, their brain waves are all disordered. And they may be really good at some other parts of their life. They may be superb at, athletics or something, but then when they sit down to actually work on, say, their relationship or their spiritual journey or their creativity, their brainwaves are disordered, and those disordered those non-coherent brainwaves are ineffective. And so these great manifestors who are doing things then are able to have these great results in the outside world. And so I wrote the second book, Mind to Matter, and I was like lightning struck in the same place a second time. First Genie in Your Genes, now Mind to Matter. And then after that, I found I was beginning to experience these extraordinary mental states myself. I was teaching peak states, peak performance, flow to others, and I began to hit levels of happiness that were just like unimaginable to me. And I began to look at the science behind that. And I found that it's chemistry. I found that there are neurochemicals like anandamide and serotonin and dopamine and beta endorphin that produce these extraordinary mental states, and that you can actually create these neurochemicals through certain styles of meditation. And that became Bliss Brain. So it's lightning struck for the third time. And I also just love living in that state and sharing it. So that's kind of the trajectory of those three books.
And so where next? I mean, it's just like, let's go for a fourth strike. What's next for you?
I'm now becoming really interested in a couple of things. One is accelerating these states, because the research that is covered in Bliss Brain mostly is focused on adepts, meditation adepts. So these are like Tibetan monks who spend 10,000 hours in meditation. Some of them have spent over 50,000 hours in meditation. And Franciscan nuns, women who've entered a convent often at an early age and have spent maybe 10, 20, 30, sometimes 60 years in deep contemplation in these altered states. And by the way, there are two paths into flow. One is athletic performance or some kind of business or personal performance, like you give a speech in front of a large audience and you feel absolutely exhilarated afterwards and you're in flow during the speech. So that's one path into flow. Or maybe you're doing, like I do, mountain biking and scuba diving. And like I remember going scuba diving recently and just becoming lost in the experience of it. That's one path into flow. The other path into flow is meditation. And these adepts are able to get to these flow states, extraordinary states, really, really quickly after their 10,000 hours of practice. But I'm intrigued by getting there fast. How do we get people there quickly? So in chapter 1 of Bliss Brain, I have one subtitle, one subhead called From 50 Years to 50 Seconds. Because it's taken me 50 years of personal growth, of experimentation, of scientific studies, of exploration to find these states. And then I teach them to people in live retreats, in virtual retreats, in brief workshops, long workshops. And in one of our recent live workshops, actually the last live workshop before the pandemic, we were hooking people up to EEGs before and after a 7-day retreat. And using these new methods, I mean, they're really new neuroscience. We've now mapped the brains of these monks and nuns and these adepts. But now that we have a brain map of what that brain state is, we can now guide people to that state in just a few minutes. And so they're sitting there, they've never meditated before very often, or never meditated successfully. And sometimes on the first day of the retreat, within 20 minutes, they have the brain waves of a Zen master who spent 40 years doing Zen. And we're seeing this on the EEG. So it's an objective measure of brain function, so that we're teaching them to do this over the course of only 7 days. And one woman, everybody had astonishing shifts in brain functions in those 7 days. But the most astonishing was one woman who, she closed her eyes on the 7th day, hooked up to an EEG, and she was in this state of bliss brain, the awakened consciousness of oneness with the universe. She was there in 47 seconds. So it's taken me 50 years to figure all this out. I don't want it to take you, Debs, or anyone listening today 50 years to figure all this stuff out. I have to go into a monastery or to go and be a renunciate and take a vow of poverty, chastity, and obedience. I don't want to have to go that route. I want to take people in 7 days to that 50-second experience where you're in surrendered bliss, one with the universe in that short space of time. So that's one thing, bring people there quickly and reliably. Science is all about replication. Spirituality is all about going and doing these practices and sticking with them and persistence. And that's a really, really valuable thing to do. We need to self-discipline. We need what Abraham Maslow called self-transcendence, beyond self-actualization. On his pyramid in the last 2 years of his life, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, he said, no, I was wrong about the pyramid. Self-actualization is not the top of the pyramid, it's self-transcendence. And we see that in these monks and nuns. They transcend their sense of self, and their brain regions that construct the self shut down and they self-transcend. But we want people to be able to get there without 10,000 hours. And now we can do that really quickly. And then the other big thing I'm super focused on is what happens to society when large numbers of people are doing this. And so there's a section in Bliss Brain called the 1%. And we've all heard about the 1% in wealth, and how the billionaires are getting richer, poor people are getting poorer, the wealth disparities are increasing in developed countries. And so I took that idea of the 1%. And what I found looking back over history, I wanted to find out, of the population of a given region, what percentage really cares about self-transcendence, about spiritual growth, about self-improvement, about a better state than they currently are in. And the number is very small. It's about 1%. If you go back to the Domesday Book of William the Conqueror in England and look at the number of people engaged in monastic or overtly spiritual pursuits, it was 1% of the population. Go back to Germany, which was keeping pretty good records at the time, China around 1300, 1200, India. These were very developed civilizations at that time, and they kept records. And the number turns out to be 1%. Go to most countries like Thailand and see what percentage of people become Buddhist monks or nuns. 1%. And this number 1% just pops out all throughout history. Look at the percentage of meditators in Europe and the US in 1980, 1%. So this 1% number has been very consistent throughout history. And then these are the people who've really been able to enter these ecstatic states of consciousness, like Saint Catherine of Siena talking about marrying God, and Rumi and Hafiz, these ecstatic states. So they're hitting flow, just like that athlete who is doing that peak performance. They're hitting flow, or that meditator, or that monk now at an MRI, they're hitting these flow states. And so those people are a really small minority. We learn from them. We want to understand their experience. And so what is this doing for our society to have that 1% of people pursuing these peak states? And then what's happening now today? And what's happening now is in 1980, 1990, it began to rise. And the number of people doing that globally, as far as we can tell from various surveys, by 2005 was 4%. It quadrupled between 1980 and 2005, quadruple the number of people who are paying attention to those peak states. In the last few years, it's hit 15% of humankind is now engaged in some kind of spiritual but non-religious pursuit to do with a better frame of mind, increased happiness, increased flow. And so far more people are hitting these states, and it's producing a shift in material well-being, or correlates with a shift in material well-being in the human species. And we're worried about the recession, we're worried about economic upheaval, all that's real. But if you look at the wealth of the average global citizen in 1980 and compare it with the wealth of the average global citizen today, people on average are 3 times as wealthy as they were in 1980. And that includes all the crashes and all the recessions, all the financial upheaval. Look at lifespan. In the last century, human lifespan has doubled. It was really consistent for a long time, and suddenly it's doubled. So I'm now looking at all of the research, and there are, again, thousands of studies here of human thriving. Things like female literacy. Like if you want to reduce your carbon footprint, educating girls, teaching girls to read is the 8th most important thing we can do to reduce our carbon footprint. There are many other things we can do, but just teaching girls to read. If girls read, they go on to become entrepreneurs, they go on to have fewer children, they go on to have more time to take care of those children. There are all kinds of reduced carbon offsets as a result of teaching girls to read. So female literacy, global literacy is growing. Human rights, since World War II, I mean, there are been horrible things. There's been the Korean War, and there's been the Civil War in Syria. I mean, our minds are captured by the problems we have right now and the short-term tragedies. But if you look at human rights since World War II, steadily they've been advancing. So there are literally thousands of measures of human well-being. And along with these shifts in consciousness, 1% in 1980, 4% in 2005, 15% today, there's been this shift in human well-being, material well-being as well. And we're now starting to see our ability to solve problems increase. Like, we're all aware of global warming and climate change. It's very real. It's threatening low-lying areas. There are catastrophic climate events happening every year as a result of it. But what people don't realize is there are all kinds of solutions we're putting in place right now. So I'm focusing in my new research and writing on those solutions. And there are huge numbers of them. I'll just mention 2 right now. One is carbon sequestration, that we literally, this isn't a dream, an idea, a theory, that we can suck that carbon out of the air. There are plants in several parts of the world right now, giant plants that are sucking in air and removing the carbon and producing carbon bricks, which are used for construction, for making furniture, all kinds of uses for these carbon bricks that they produce. That's not a future science fiction fantasy. These are plants in operation right now, and they're running up economically at about $200 a ton. So we now know the cost of carbon sequestration. We're doing it. One other project that's been endorsed by many governments, including the UN, is the idea of planting 1 trillion trees. And these are native trees that thrive where they're planted. So we're reversing deforestation. Costa Rica has tripled its amount of rainforest in the last 30 years. And it's a model for other countries. And by planting native species, we can increase the number of trees. And there are about 2 trillion trees on Earth. If we plant another trillion, as those trees mature, they will suck up so much carbon that it'll return the Earth's atmosphere to pre-industrial revolution levels of carbon in the atmosphere. Again, do you hear about this? Is this frontline page news? I mean, there's all this fabulous stuff going on. So the last chapter of Bliss Brain is a little curtain raiser of looking at 1,000 of these studies and picking, I just picked 12.
Just 12.
They're all very positive. And then the other thing is that we're becoming much wiser and much smarter. As we meditate, that translates into the real world. In a long-term study by McKinsey Corporation, it's a big consulting firm, global consulting firm, they did a 10-year study of peak performers, people who are not schlubbies, they are people at the peak of their profession. And they found that these people pursue flow states. They get into flow states, they want flow, and they know that they'll write well in flow. They know that they'll speak well in flow. They know that they'll have great ideas in flow, because in flow, your brain is producing a lot of gamma. And gamma, that's the brain wave, that's when your brain is firing at 30 times per second and higher. And so I call it the Einstein wave. Einstein said that to figure out the answer to a complex problem, you have to move to a higher level of consciousness. Napoleon Hill in chapter 15 in Think and Grow Rich, he says, you cannot solve the problems that are generated by your current level of consciousness. At that level of consciousness, you have to ascend to a higher level of consciousness. And so there are all these people throughout history who meditate, who seek to become one with the universe and channel the universal wisdom and joy and love. That's why we're so happy. People in this state are incredibly happy. And so gamma is the wave that is the indication to an EEG neuroscientist of both happiness and creativity. There's lots of gamma. These Tibetan monks, when they close their eyes and meditate, their level of gamma goes up 25-fold, not 25% or 250%. That is 25 times the amount of gamma. Their happiness, they're in bliss. That's why the book's called Bliss Brain. You are feeling really, really happy. And then when you come back from the mountaintop, when you return to your daily life, like I have a nonprofit that I manage that gets advanced therapies to veterans with PTSD. It's called the Veteran Stress Project. We've treated over 20,000 veterans in the last 10 years. That's a really practical thing to do. So you aren't just losing yourself in this ecstatic state and then coming back to your body and to your ordinary life as a smiling vegetable. You're doing kick-ass stuff in the world. You're treating veterans. You're helping people who are suffering suffer less. So what the McKinsey study found was that these people who are in these states and then come back to their bodies, and a 10-year study of peak performers, again, they're having more gamma. They're in that gamma creativity happiness. They're in flow, but then they start to do their regular work. They are 5 times as productive in their own assessment of themselves, 5 times as productive as they normally would be. That's echoed by the results of the study by the defense. There's an arm of the US government called the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency called DARPA. And in the 1970s, if you watch the movie Men Who Stare at Ghosts, that was experimenting with distant viewing and all kinds of phenomena. Those were DARPA projects. DARPA is really interested in consciousness and the effect of consciousness on the outside world. And they find that when you attain those elevated states of non-local awareness that Einstein and Napoleon Hill and many other people talk about, and you then come back to Earth and start doing stuff, DARPA was testing people's ability to solve really complicated problems, not easy problems. Problems like global warming, problems like overpopulation, problems like income disparity, all the social ills we have right now, weaponized AI. I have a lot of sort of doom and gloom stuff in the back of Bliss Brain and how we can solve it. And so DARPA study found when you come out of that flow state and you're back in your executive chair, your ability to solve problems goes up by 490%. To solve complicated, difficult conundrums increases by 490%, almost a 5-fold increase in problem-solving ability, echoing the McKinsey study of high performers. So now we had 1% of the people doing that in 1100 and 1980. We had 4% in 2005. We have about 15% today. And then now look at that curve, look where that curve is going. And these people are becoming 5 times as productive, have a 5-fold ability to solve complex problems. It's like global warming, income disparity. We're going to start to tackle some of the tough shit in the next 10, 20 years. And we're going to do it. I mean, the human race is going to do it. Look at the trajectory of what we've already solved over the course of the last decade and 3 decades. And we are in for an unprecedented period of human thriving. So that's what my next few books are about: how to get there quickly without 10,000 hours, how to do it in 50 seconds, 50 seconds or less, how to be in that happy state, stay in that happy state, and then be productive. And what happens to the world when you have all these millions of people walking around in this flow state, highly productive, highly adaptive problem solving, and incredibly happy.
I'm excited. I'm like, oh my God, I can see the future. The future is fantastic. But now I'm going to ask you. So we know your research has shown, your book tells us, we know that when we get into flow state, when we meditate and we get into flow state and then come back to the real world and do things, we are 5 times more productive. We are 5 times more able to solve complicated problems. We are happier. We are blissful. I loved your surrendered bliss. I just love that idea. Okay. So why, tell me, maybe I'm just talking for me. Why does meditating feel like it's just another thing on my to-do list? Help me get over that.
For me, it was the same way, Debs. I learned to meditate when I was 15 years old, and I mean, the spiritual teacher said, close your eyes and still your... There are just two things you have to do. 1 is close your eyes. 2 is still your mind. Well, number 1's fairly easy. We can all close our eyes. We do it every night to go to sleep. Still your mind? Are you crazy? I mean, the human mind is not meant to be still. Think about your ancestors. Our ancestors evolving 100,000 years ago. There they are in the middle of the jungle. Things are there. They're predators and threats, and the Neanderthals are still around, ready to grab their resources. And so our minds did not evolve to be still. Our minds evolved to be looking for what's wrong out there all the time. And so when you close your eyes, for one thing, there are about 11 million bits of information traveling from your eyes through your optic nerve to your occipital cortex in the back of your brain. And when you close your eyes, you cut off that flow of information and you then start to think. And those thoughts aren't positive. In Bliss Brain, I summarize a study by Harvard, 2 Harvard psychologists of over 250,000 people, and they find that we're doing negative thinking about 47% of the time, especially when we're relaxing. When we're relaxing and we have nothing on our minds, our bodies, our brain's default's called the default mode network, and it tends to ruminate about the problems of the past and how those might become issues in our future, because that's the way our ancestors survived. You had to think about the tiger that almost ate you yesterday and obsess about every detail of that experience, and the tiger that might eat you tomorrow. And 100,000 years ago, it was that default mode network. And it's the default mode because the brain uses every spare bit of processing ability not devoted to doing a task. It defaults those resources to that network that thinks about the bad stuff in the past, bad stuff that might happen in the future, and studies it and regurgitates it and reviews it endlessly. And that's obsessive negative thinking. We all do it, and it leads to terrible health consequences. One of the mind to matter studies shows that that negative thinking leads directly. It is the strongest correlatory factor to the buildup of beta amyloid plaques in your brain. And beta amyloid plaques are Alzheimer's disease. And you don't want to have beta amyloid plaques in your brain. And this research study showed, brilliant study done about a year ago, that the single biggest factor wasn't lifestyle or diet or exercise or social connections. It was negative thinking. And it scaled. The more negative thinking people did, the more beta amyloid plaques they had in their brain. So thinking is able to shape our bodies, our brains, our futures. And so you want to be doing positive thinking, but you can't easily do it because our ancestors didn't survive that way. There was no evolutionary benefit to smelling the roses, and there was an extremely large evolutionary benefit to noticing the tiger in the grass. So our brains work this way. Close your eyes and try and meditate, and all you do is default to that negative thinking. So what I did was, in around 2008, I designed a meditation called eco meditation, because I can't still my own mind. And I said, okay, what do we do to counteract that mind wandering? And what I said is, let's just do physiological things that a master meditator would do. So I looked at the research into master meditators. I looked at the research into mechanical ways of relaxing us. Like, for example, one very simple one of the 7 steps of eco meditation is to relax your tongue on the floor of your mouth. Because when we're tense, when we're stressed, our tongues go rigid, and we hold our tongues rigid most of the day. When you relax, it's your tongue on the floor of your mouth. It sends a signal through the vagus nerve to every single organ system in your body. It says, there's no tiger in the room, relax. So that's one of the 7 steps of eco meditation. And I designed this little thing because I can't still my own mind. I've never been able to do that. And so 50 years of meditation, I've been a complete failure at stilling my own mind, but I can relax my tongue on the floor of my mouth. And I can breathe 6 seconds in, 6 seconds out, which puts you in heart coherence. And so I designed this little routine, put it on the web, people began to use it, suddenly it exploded in popularity, we began to study it, do research studies, then do EEG, then MRI studies of eco meditation. And if you just do these 7 simple things, like one woman called Toni Tomlinson, she was one of the early adopters, and we've got thousands of people like Toni emailing us in their stories. And Toni wrote, she said, I'm so burned out on parenting, on life. I have high cortisol 99% of the time. I failed at every meditation practice I've ever tried. And when I sat down, Dawson, to do your 7 steps of eco meditation, my mental talk was, Toni, you failed at every other practice, you'll fail at this too. And I just began to do these 7 mechanical, physiological steps. And when I hit step 3, my heart was filled with bliss, and tears of joy began to roll down my cheeks. And I was in that place I'd longed to be for so long. And then she wrote to end with, I'm going to do this every day. And that's what people are saying, because it's so pleasurable to have that serotonin. We boost our serotonin by doing this, and our dopamine, 2 very pleasurable neurochemicals. We boost our anandamide, and anandamide has the same chemical structure, docks with the same receptor sites as THC, the active ingredient in marijuana. In fact, serotonin has the same chemical structure as magic mushroom, psilocybin. So psilocybin docks with certain receptor sites. Serotonin does as well, but psilocybin comes from a magic mushroom. Serotonin comes from a magic meditation, and you do the meditation and you start to feel super high. And so we're just cranking out all these people like Toni now who do it 1 or 2 times, and the bliss states they attain as all those pleasurable neurochemicals are unlocked in their brains feel so good that they then are able to meditate without ever once stilling their mind. So that's why I say it's necessary to do effective meditation. For most people, what they're doing in meditation is ineffective, and in Bliss Brain, I parse out using neuroscience brain studies which things are effective and which things are ineffective. And the vast majority of what people do and call and think of as meditation is ineffective. It does not move the needle. It does not put you into a flow state. It does not produce wiring in the brain. But if you do the right stuff, if you do the right mixture of mindfulness and self-hypnosis and acupressure and biofeedback, neurofeedback, if you do all those things correctly, your brain starts to rewire itself within a few days. In one study we showed that in 4 weeks of this produced anatomical changes in the brain. Anatomy began to change, with the suffering part of the brain, the default mode network, quietening, and the happiness part of the brain, and the connection part of the brain, and the integration part of the brain, that part of the brain lit up in people in this randomized controlled trial. So you have to do an effective meditation for this to work.
So it's not just it's not just about the practice, it's about the right practice, the perfect practice, rather than what I do is to force myself to sit still with my eyes scrunched up. Stop thinking.
I'm sure that works great.
Brilliant. I feel fantastic afterwards.
Yeah,
so I am going to do your 7 steps. I am going to do eco meditation. I've decided.
Good. Yeah, you'll feel the difference right away. It's a very somatic experience. When you hit serotonin, you'll feel that. When you hit dopamine, you'll feel that rush of motivation. When you hit norepinephrine, you're going to feel alertness. Nitric oxide, you're going to be wide awake. I mean, so there are all kinds of neurochemicals that are happening in there, and you just feel it in your body. You feel it hitting one after the other. It's like, whoa. In fact, people are so ecstatic after doing this. They're reaching such ecstatic heights that the last part of eco meditation is really important, which is coming down to earth, because people get so spacey. I mean, you see these images of, Rumi or Hafiz or St. Catherine of Siena or St. Francis of Assisi, just laying there totally stoned and blissed out. And that's great for your meditation period. But then you got to drive afterwards. You got to get kids to school. You've got to, meet the deadline at work. You got to write your blog post. You got to balance your checkbook. All of these things mean you have to integrate. And so the last little 2 minutes of eco meditation is come down to earth, look around you, what time of day it is, what's your next appointment, look at the calendar. So you have to ground your spirituality. Back in the old days, 1100, 1300, people went into the monastery, went into the desert, had these elevated states, and they were in their bubble, and it was great. Now, we're bringing those elevated states to the prison. We have people working in prisons and helping prisoners do that. Again, working with traumatized female victims of sexual violence from the Congo Civil War. We're doing this with them. We're doing it with those Rwandans. We're doing this with war veterans. We're doing this with people, victims of childhood abuse. So this is very real world stuff. It is not in a monastery stuck away, the province, the owned, curated by the 1%. This is for everybody. And that's why it's able to produce a sweeping change in the mental health of the globe.
I love it. I'm excited. Now, I'm going to change tack a little bit. Right at the start, you said, I suddenly got this insight that I should write the first book. And I suddenly got this insight. And I was thinking, you made it sound so like it just came to me. But I heard that you put yourself in the path of insight, and you put yourself in the situations, you put yourself where you would meet minds, you would meet other people. Tell me about your insight path, because how do you get that insight? What's your bigger picture for getting insights?
Well, I wrote the core of Mind to Matter in the core chapters. I just got them outlined in a 7-day period. And because I have a big organization, a company that I run, I also have this big nonprofit, and I'm doing tons of charitable work and all kinds of other things. My writing time is really compressed. I have to sit down and I have to produce, 30, 50 pages in a day. So it's not like I'm an ivory tower academic with tenure and a steady paycheck, and I can just go off into there and write. What I do is, so that 7-day period that I teach at Esalen Institute and a few other places like that, these advanced leading edge places that where they share these new leading edge ideas. And there'd been a mudslide at Esalen, and Esalen was closed. So suddenly I had 7 free days. And again, I had this deadline for Mind to Matter. So each morning I woke up around 4 a.m. and I meditated for 2 hours. Now at that point, you're totally one with the universe. And I write in Mind to Matter about letting go of your local reality and local mind and becoming one with non-local mind. That's what all these great mystics do. They become one with non-local mind. These great creatives are one with non-local mind. That's where they get their ideas, according to Albert Einstein, Napoleon Hill, and a lot of other people much smarter than me. And so you're downloading these ideas. So I meditate for about 2 hours each of those 7 days. Actually, I added another week end onto it, so it was actually 9 days, like 9 days. So I got out of bed, and it's important to meditate, Debs, immediately on waking. You don't want to do something else like go check your email or look at
feed the horses or
yeah, you absolutely cannot do that. Now, you do it after you've framed your day in meditation, but when you begin, you have to start the day by really tuning in. So you tune in that way. Now, I was doing it for about 2 hours every morning, and then I wasn't coming back down to earth. I was staying in that elevated state. And as I did that, And I then went online. And now again, I have to read for a book like Mind to Matter. I have to read and understand and explain about 400 scientific studies. And these are very difficult papers to read and understand. The average layperson would be unable to comprehend them. So I have to go and read them. I have to figure out what's relevant, and I have to explain something written by a Nobel laureate with an IQ of 200 to the average person. How do I do that? So what I would do after my meditation is I would, without coming back to reality, in that flow state, I'd sit down and I'd start to work, and intuitively I'd be guided to places. And I would find a bit of information I needed in the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the Ukraine, an obscure little journal that no one's ever heard of. And the nugget of information I needed was there. How did I get there? I was just totally guided every day into where to go next and how to interpret it, how to explain it to people. That same year, I had to write this chapter in Mind to Matter about the global parts of Mind to Matter, how our brains are entrained by and how our bodies evolved in the magnetic field of the earth, and how those brain waves, right from high waves like gamma to slow waves like delta and theta, all of those waves are also the same waves as the Earth. These are called the Schumann resonances of the planet. And so I had to write a chapter, a very, very difficult chapter to write, about how our internal brain wave states correlate with these planetary fields, and also these fields are shaped by the solar wind moving past the Earth. It moves past the Earth at about 3,000 kilometers an hour. It's going very, very fast. It distorts the Earth's field, and it distorts human function as well to some degree. It's a big subject. I knew nothing about it. And then one of those weekends that year, I agreed to speak at a conference. I sat down on a science panel with 3 other scientists, and it turned out that the guy sitting next to me was the world's leading expert on the Schumann resonances and field line resonances and how they correlate with human brainwaves. Of all the millions of scientists in the world, that conference, I happened to get seated next to the guy who was the world's top authority on that. He explained it to me on the back of a napkin.
I love it.
So the whole book was synchronous. This whole section in Mind to Matter about all the synchronies that resulted in Mind to Matter getting written. I mean, there's synchrony after synchrony after synchrony that happens. So
I'm writing a book
the path of synchrony.
Yeah, I'm writing a book called Hacking Serendipity, about putting yourself in the path of these opportunities, and that you have to be there. So I'm going to have to interview you for that. We'll have to case study that. That's fantastic. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, so you do that. So you meditate, you deliberately put yourself there, you give yourself uncluttered space. You can't easily write a book or write a significant amount of material if you give yourself a 1-hour window. For me, it takes at least a half-day window, and I would rather have a full day without any interruption. So I'd start at work at 6 a.m. 2 hours of meditation. I'd work a solid 12 hours, usually till 6 p.m. And then I would get out of my chair, I would shower and eat breakfast at 6 p.m. Because the previous 12 hours, I'd been in such flow, I didn't care about going to the bathroom or eating or anything. I mean, I was in such intense flow, and you're then downloading, you aren't even you're like channeling all these Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein and Fibonacci, and you're in touch with the living, beating heart of science, and you just feel yourself as this instrument, and you're writing inspired ideas, and you come back the next day or the next week and read the stuff, and you say, who wrote this? Not a guy with my IQ for sure. So we can be one with great creative fields, and again, these field line resonances, and there are these huge pulses of creative energy that influence the planet. And when you align yourself with those, there is love, there's wisdom, there's kindness, there's compassion, there's joy, there's gratitude. That's why it's bliss brain. You feel good, and you also feel one with nature, one with something larger than yourself. And you're writing then from that perspective. You're not writing from your local struggles, your local self. You're writing from your non-local self. Chapter 1, Chapter 7 of Mind to Matter is all about non-local self, joining with non-local self. The book is not mind over matter. It's being a channel for the wisdom of the universe into your local reality. That's why it's mind to matter. It's the great mind, the cosmic mind, into the local mind of your mind, and then into the matter around you. So it's aligning yourself with that mind. When you're aligned with that mind, you don't have to find creativity. There is so much creativity flowing through you, it's hard to find places to put it all. You have so much gamma in your brain. It's like you're just you're walking around completely inspired all day, every day. It's an extraordinary mental state, and it's accessible to anyone now. We're finding that people can enter the state, do it enough, and it just starts to permeate your everyday reality.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to start. I promised it was about half an hour, and we've just gone over.
Yeah, when you said half an hour, Debs, I didn't say anything when you said half an hour, but I was thinking, yeah, right.
We could talk for hours. We could talk for hours. There's about 1,000 questions I've noted, but I'm going to try and keep to our time-ish. Okay, so I've got a couple of final questions for you. The question that I have to ask everybody this question, and I just love it, it's one of my favorite questions, is when was the last time you did something for the first time?
Oh, what a wonderful question. Well, the brain thrives on novelty. So, for example, one of the things you do in meditation is you do novel things, do new things. And so you want to deliberately induce novelty. It was this morning. My wife sleeps a little bit later than I do, doesn't get up at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock usually. And she comes down, usually from our upstairs bedroom, and I've been meditating for a while. And I decided to say something to her. And I usually say, I love you. You're beautiful. I'm so grateful to be with you. I say things like that, but we've been married a long time, and so you kind of run out of new things to say. So this morning she came down, and I thought of something I'd never said to her before, and just a way of expressing appreciation to her. And I said that to her, and she was like startled and surprised. So that was the last time. You just seek novelty. You seek, you're making a dish you made many times before. You use new spices in it, and you walk a different route. You walk on the other side of the road. You walk, on the road rather than on the pavement. You just you have that kind of a brain, and the brain thrives on novelty. So you want to be deliberately inducing that in your life every day, because it's one of the triggers for flow.
Love it. That's fantastic. You're the first person who said today. It's like usually you go, about 6 years ago or last week. So happy about that. Okay. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you want to tell me?
Oh yeah. Well, about 27 straight hours of it, but we have to leave that till next time, Debs.
Now, look, but the thing is, the most important thing for me is, how do people get in touch with you, and how do they find out about the eco meditation, the 7 steps? Because I think that for my audience, that's like, if we can get 12 hours of writing done in a day, I mean, like, wow. So if you can teach us how to do that, that would be brilliant. How do we get hold of you? How do we get that information?
Okay, well, the best way to do it is by following the links in either Bliss Brain or Mind to Matter. So Mind to Matter, there are 7 eco meditation tracks. In Bliss Brain, there are 8 different eco meditation tracks, and you want to use those tracks and use them in sequence, use them in the order in the book. And those are in the deepening practices at the end of the book. And then you can get Mind to Matter at mindtomatter.com. You can get Bliss Brain at blissbrain.com. The publisher actually gave us a whole bunch of books at cost, so we're giving them away at blissbrain.com. We pay shipping and handling, but the book itself is free. And then when you do that, you'll also get links to those 8 meditations. So just try the first one, start with the first one, and you'll feel yourself start to shift.
Brilliant. And is there anything else, any other way you want us to get in touch with you? So if people want to contact you, what's the best way?
Well, I love sharing this with businesses, and I'm now doing more and more research on productivity and creativity, especially as it relates to business functioning. And so we've now begun to collect data on how we can induce flow states. And also I've done a few executive flow sessions. These are really interesting because if you have an executive team together, say for a meeting, either a virtual meeting or a live meeting, and there are personality conflicts, and some of them are worried about stuff going on at home, someone has a health problem, they aren't all fully present. And this research by Gallup showed that only about a third of employees, both top and bottom level employees, are really engaged at work. The other 2/3 are partially engaged or actively disengaged from work. So that Gallup poll was a real shocker that only a third of people are engaged. And so when you have that meeting, it's not very creative. People are stumbling over each other and having little rivalries and conflicts. But I've now become really interested in the phenomenon of group flow. So it's great to have individual flow, but we found now, if I work with an executive team, that I can work with those people at the start of the meeting. We'll do a brief induction of flow. Now you've got everybody in the room in flow together, and big gamma, big creativity, calm mind, calm heart, all those issues go away. And now what that team accomplishes with that 5 times productivity and 490% problem solving ability collectively together, it is awesome. And I'm studying this now. I'm getting research on this. I think we're showing that people's productivity goes through the roof. So that's one other thing I'm going to do more on, is more nonprofits, more corporations, more organizations where we actually bring teams into flow together. And then that's where they start their work, and then they start their project that way, and magic happens.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. That I'm going to put all your links and at the end of the transcription, so people can get in touch with you in those ways. Mindtomatter.com, blissbrain.com are the 2 key places to get the books, and dawsonchurch.com is your main
or you can go
website.
to, if you go to dawsongift.com, that's another cool site, dawsongift.com, because we didn't even touch on this, but doing all this stuff produces, in one study I did, a doubling of your level of circulating immune antibodies. So your antibodies that chomp up viruses and bacteria double in a week with the right practices. And there's a study in a medical journal that shows that. And there's a meditation that sparks immunity at that dawsongift.com site. So there's a special form of meditation there, targets directly on immunity, and that's one thing that's probably worth sharing. So that's probably, other than the 2 book sites, that's probably the best way to get a hold of me, is dawsongift.com.
Brilliant. Okay, Dawson, I can't tell you how much fun I've had. So thank you so much for your time. I'm sure we're going to have to do this again. There's going to be so many different, my notebook is full of questions.
More questions and answers. And I just visualizing your book on serendipity, just going easily, flowing. This has been a hopefully a good lubricant for it. And I just visualize that project being joyful, easy, light, and productive for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
All the best.